The following is a work of critical analysis. It is not intended for any other purposes, it is not a work of piracy, and is covered under fair use as a transformative critical work. So we're coming up on the interesting part of the movie. Not that the previous bit hasn't been great, there have been some fantastic scenes. However, the climax of the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya is something entirely special in and of itself. Before that, though, we have the effect of Kyon opening his eyes after the time travel. We've said a whole lot about the repeated use of this visual technique throughout the movie, and it's really important here as Kyon finally makes his judgment and his decision that we have not left the mind of Kyon. We are still one with him as audience. Now, Yuki has brought them back to the exact place where Haruhi and Koizumi changed clothes earlier. Kyon even notes this as probably not a coincidence. So if we accept that at face value, and we probably should, considering it would still be odd even if he doesn't have a line, and him having a line there puts that front and center and shines a glaring spotlight on it. So what can we interpret from the fact that he has to start from the same place he started from earlier? Well, I think it goes back to figuring out what's truly effective and what's truly meaningful, especially in what we'll see in the climax. I believe that Kyon failed in his attempt to realize the reason why the world was changed. He certainly gathered the keys, as the bookmark said, and ostensibly obtained the key to go home, but as we talked about with the different levels the film's operating on, he has not solved the riddle of why Yuki would go about doing that yet. So it shouldn't be surprising that he's put back at square one at the start of when he obtained the key and when he tried to return back, when he tried to fix everything. He did not fix everything by gathering Haruhi and Koizumi and everyone in the club room. That only superficially addressed the problem. The problem with Nagato not feeling appreciated still persists. So Kyon, having failed at addressing that problem, is put back at the start of the level and told to do it again, get it right this time. Of course, this reading relies very heavily on the omnipotence of the Yuki Nagato in the original world. How would she know all of that to put him back in this situation? I think we can generally just wave that off as some sort of unexplained, not really important detail. If we really wanted to, we could just chalk it up to coincidence and consider it simply the author putting Kyon back at the start of the level, instead of Yuki. So Mikuru and Kyon have some very expository dialogue to help the viewer along here. It's pretty necessary considering all the jumps that the movie makes. We really wouldn't want people to get super lost. And again, the hot and cold coming back into things with jumping between midsummer and then the start of winter. And that's one angle the show has really played up, so it's earned the right to use the temperature as some sort of setting to identify when and where they are. So when Nagato's introduced here, I really like how they do it. There's the scenery in the background in front and center, and then so slowly and so discreetly does Nagato come into the frame. And that's all payoff for everything that we've seen so far, with the difference between Haruhi's visual style and Nagato's emphasis on the background in her world. I also very much like the transition into English in these few lines. Kyon says, I can't jump out and shoot them, using the third person singular them instead of her. And Miss Asahina's line is also cut from the original where she mentions her. And even though we so very much know who it is already, we can see her silhouette, but we still have that, Oh man, who is it? We can't hint at it. So just a general props to Bandai on the dub there. So let's get really in depth about these things. I first want to say how there's no flashy lights, there's no Sword Art Online type action going on here in this big change of the world. There's nothing like even what happened at the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya with the closed space and this engine. Instead, what we have is just Yuki standing alone, raising her hand and waving it back and forth as the wind picks up. And that's the whole transformation sequence for the world. But even that is so subtle and so great because what is raising your hand and waving? That is considered a way to get people to notice you in human body language everywhere. So when Yuki wants people to notice her, even the magic spell that she goes about casting to do all this stuff to change the world into one that she thinks will help her with that, it's just waving, just raising her arm and waving, beckoning someone to notice her and give her a little attention. Also, the cuts back and forth after Asahina's line of what incredible power. They don't have that distance aspect that we talked about earlier. It's Kyon in portrait and then Yuki in profile. They're not looking at each other, they haven't come to an understanding yet, but there's no distance between them, and the zoom-ins on Kyon's face emphasize that fact. That even though she was so far away for so long, Kyon sees her now and she's right there. She's so close. There's a couple shots coming up that follow the same technique of cutting out the characters' eyes. I'm not going to mention them all, but be on the lookout for how difficult this is for the characters and how that's conveyed by the fact that we don't see their eyes. But now we have the distance that Kyon has to cross, and it is a very long way. So Kyon's initial confrontation with Yuki is shot in much the same way as that first confrontation we saw in the post-disappearance world. We have Kyon on the right, again, looking at her and talking to her. But a giant barrier in the way this time, with this huge pole taking up a third of the frame. It's still there even on Yuki's side, showing that she still has the same inhibitions about being honest with Kyon. And this shot here should remind us of the first time that Kyon saw Haruhi in the post-disappearance world, with half his face cut off, and then thinking about what he's going to do. And here's where Kyon calls Yuki out on her bullshit. Throughout the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya and the movie as well, we absolutely know that Kyon is an unreliable narrator. That is so very clear to us from the entirety of the series, from the first shot of the movie where Kyon's talking about the world ending and ice picks into the ground, and from even the first monologue in the series about Santa Claus. We know that Kyon is not partial, and part of the fun of the series is seeing these things that Koizumi or Mikuru will tell him, and then him having to figure out, is that true? Is that something I can take at face value? And that not being clear. Again, tying back to exactly what happens in Hyperion. And what's really cool in this scene is that we finally get one of the minor characters to answer for that. That they're not telling the truth, or that Yuki's perception of the world, even in all her infinite wisdom, is still skewed and wrong. And while it's certainly still understandable and relatable and logical that she would do something like that, we can, and Kyon certainly does, still call into question her biases and her worldview as something that we can attack, and we can say, that wasn't quite right, Yuki, or at least acknowledging that she can have her own agenda that is separate from what her programming is, not only, but also what Kyon wants or what the other characters are striving for. I think it's very funny that Kyon literally shrinks her while she shrinks into a mirror. That's that's pretty cute, and it's also so much payback on the reflections that this movie has been going rampant with the entire film. So here we come to the climax, and we're gonna go pretty slowly on this one because there's so much content condensed so very quickly, and the shots of the film get a little surreal. However, that is not something that the viewer is conscious of, certainly on the first go around, and it's not something that very much matters at all. Um, until now, there's been very, 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 very little of that in the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya or in the movie itself. Even though crazy things are shown on screen and supernatural things, the movie never gets weird or never leaves what's actually going on in the world. It never gets fanciful in this regard, except in this monologue. And while it's doing that, we see how effective that can be. And it's probably in part because the show has been so grounded before now that leaving that in a skillful way, in a way that's not jarring or disorienting, is very, very useful for making us think and making all this visual symbolism and visual storytelling that's been going on pay off. So the first shot is of the middle school Yuki expositing what's going to happen. And that's sort of that first level reading of what Kyo needs to do and explaining it, and this is the solution to the mystery. But then we jump right to the third part, and I think this is Kyon really getting at the true mystery, and one of the only times he really addresses the true problem in the film. That is, what's the solution for the first level? It's shoot Nagato and go back to the normal world. What's the solution for the second level, the conflict between Haruhi and Yuki? Let's choose Haruhi over Yuki and go back to the original world. And what's the conflict for the third level, or the solution for the conflict on the third level? That would be appreciate Yuki and address the root issue, and then return to the original world. As we'll see later on, actually shooting Nagato isn't a possibility. Like, that solution doesn't solve the day. You can't win the day simply by following the plot and not addressing these character issues. We'll also see that choosing Haruhi, as he does by the end of this monologue, doesn't win him the day either. That's not a solution that is valid. Instead, only consider the final resolution of this monologue scene to be when Kyon goes up to see Yuki on the roof at the very end of the film. Because Kyon is thinking these things. He's not speaking these things to Yuki. He hasn't conveyed them to her until he says, we value you as a person, tell that to the data integration thought entity. That will come after you because we value you, and not just you as plot device. So until Yuki receives that message, this movie cannot end. And while Kyon exposits it here, he says that he empathizes for her and that she should be allowed to have these feelings. He doesn't convey that to Yuki until the other options are discarded and he suffered the pain for failing and addressing those first. So now we have these matching cuts that put us back in the classroom as Kyon monologues about being denied the basic human right of having emotions. We have everyone ignoring her putting on the Santa hat, and her being out of color and faded out in the background as Haruhi and Mikuru dominate the screen with their colors and their light. Kyon talks about how he perceived Nagato and how it was wrong, and just relying on her as plot device instead of person. There are two quick cuts of Nagato's smile and the admittance form, and Kyon rejects the idea that what happened to Yuki was out of sorts. Instead, what he says is that it would be only natural for that to happen. However, he doesn't actually connect it back to himself and the relationship he has with Haruhi. I think that's where this movie stops short, and I think that would be a little too self-aware for Kyon. I mean, there's not much else of a story if Kyon finally realizes what he has with his relationship with Haruhi. And flipping open the pages of Hyperion, Kyon finally realizes why he had to go through all of this. Because he didn't get the answer right. He's referencing the key or the answer he was looking for, or like the destination of this movie, the thing that will return him to where he wants to be. And he finally realizes that that's not just finding Haruhi in the post-disappearance world and gathering the keys. So this next shot right here, well, very graphically stark and very clear at what the symbols are, you know, having them float in front of him opposed. It's very obvious. Kyon is accepting Yuki's dichotomy here, and he's legitimizing it, and I think that's the reason he gets stabbed. Not that there's some sort of direct, surface level plot connection between the two, but instead that he still thinks it's about him. He still thinks that it's some decision he has to make, that Yuki left up to him because it would be some personal choice about what he wanted. I think this is very good because it puts Kyon in this type of limited scope that he can't really see the forest through the trees, so he's addressing the primary concern, and that's a concern that he has first and foremost on his mind. While Yuki doesn't have anything against Haruhi, like we said earlier in the film with Koizumi and Yuki, they both envy Haruhi and Kyon. So what Yuki's saying is, please put me on the same level as her, and what Kyon is interpreting is, oh, you want me to choose between you and her. And I think that's the heartbreaking part of this film. I think that's the question we're asking here is, can you really love multiple people? But the rest of this scene is about Kyon realizing his affection towards Haruhi and not making that leap to extend it to Nagato as well. And I think that could be because he still values her as plot device in that role, that he still can't see that even her decisions might be fallacious, or as we said, he's just generally a slow person who doesn't really understand things that quickly. Not that many of us would have gotten that. I mean, we're pretty much all as self-centered as Kyon, aren't we? Don't we all just want to be the main character of our own anime? Or don't we see life as that? So this is where this scene becomes legendary. When Kyon's reflection starts talking to himself. Every time we've seen a reflection, there's been some sort of line about how things should be, or referencing what the person did in the previous timeline, or generally contrasting what's going on with what should be going on. And here we have the perfect visual payoff. And KyoAni hits it out of the park on this one, where Kyon's reflection comes and talks to him and challenges him on his bullshit, on his self-centered attitude, and on his perceptions about everything. Mirror Kyon first attacks the idea that being the main character of your own anime with all the supernatural stuff wouldn't be fun. Of course it would be fun. As he does this, we set up the turnstile. Some more visual payback to the train metaphor we established earlier, but not too early in the film. Mirror Kyon has his back to Kyon, implying that he doesn't respect or feel threatened by him at all. Mirror Kyon then extends the question. That means that nothing was interesting at all. When weighing and supporting this point of view, the camera then switches to the club room and shows all the things that Haruhi was associated with in her bag. The Christmas decorations and everything piling out and flooding out and overwhelming Kyon. and the pressure of all of that, which is a very clear symbol for everything that Haruhi made Kyon go through. And Mirror Kyon rightly admits that Haruhi is overbearing, she's annoying, and she's just generally a negative on the lives of everyone that she interacts with. I also like the physicality of him flying out of the window and then falling back on the floor of the club room, because it really emphasizes how painful this realization is for Kyon, and how being honest with ourselves is not a process taken lightly. And then Mirror Kyon pulls the trump card, and he says, how can you possibly back out or rescind that decision now? You've already pressed the button. You've already admitted to this. And faced with his own hypocrisy, Yuki is there looking down on him for it.
Why'd you do it, man? Weren't you the one who was always whining about it? You were always
Then we're back at the turnstile, and we have the snow. I'm sure everybody who's seen the film knows this, but Yuki's name means snow in Japanese. And the snow sculptures of the other characters really sets up a good symbol that, as Mirror Kyon is talking about what would happen to the other three, he says that they would just remain these labels, these one-line things, and that's all that they would be. And that's to contrast with loving someone as a full person. And we see Mirror Kyon go on to then explain how Yuki would be different, and that how you would still get to appreciate the little things about her personality and who she actually is, even if it's a bit reserved. And Kyon realizes that she could be more than just character in show or minor character in his life, but she could be all that she is, and he could be there to appreciate that. And now he finally realizes that's what he threw away. And once again, what he doesn't realize is that's exactly what he provided for Haruhi, and that's the benefit he gave to her that everybody's been chasing after him for. That's his superpower, like we discussed earlier. He doesn't quite get there in this scene. And the power of your illusions and the strength that it takes to overcome and be honest with yourself, it cannot be illustrated in any better way than what's done in this scene right here, where Mirror Kyon steps on his head and forces him to address the issue, quite literally. And it's why being figurative and fanciful in this scene is so ascendant and so legendary, because it really makes this inner struggle something that is physical and tangible and relatable on the screen. The text here is that second level reading of Haruhi versus Yuki. The subtext here is, didn't you get something out of loving Haruhi, of appreciating her? Don't you value that relationship? Aren't you in love with her? He can't be that honest with himself, but that's how I see this scene every time. And then we pay it through with the train metaphor. We have Yuki grasping his sleeve like she did to pull him back into dinner, and him ignoring her this time. As a final note for the climax scene here, I want to point out the visual direction and how people are set up on the screen. When the disappearance happens, in that first scene, Yuki is on the left, Kyon is on the right. He approaches from right to left. In the scene earlier and in the rest of this scene, Yuki is on the left, Kyon is on the right. On the rooftop scene at the end, Kyon is going to be on the right, Yuki's on the left. Same situation. And here Kyon moves past Yuki. In the first scene, he comes to Yuki, he embraces her world, and he samples it. And here we see Kyon leaving that behind and walking left towards Haruhi, who's on the left once again, as she was in the film. Kyon's always moving to the left. And throughout the course of the film, he's started at the far right, encountered Yuki, who was in the way of him returning to Haruhi, and he passed Yuki, left her behind, and continued on. Also note here the exception to this rule. Whenever Kyon is attempting to return to the original timeline, he moves to the right, such as the train scene when he's running towards Haruhi's new school. Indeed, almost every shot in the entire film can be seen as either Kyon moving left to Yuki to embrace her new world, or right, backwards, towards Haruhi's world. And what this scene is doing, in the way that it sets up the movement here, is breaking that and saying Haruhi lies past Yuki. Once you've sampled Yuki and consumed Yuki and seen what she has to offer, then you can return to Haruhi. It's not ignoring her, it's forcing you to get past Yuki to get to where Kyon wants to be. And now he's very literally done that. Now very much remember this for the final scene with Yuki and Kyon on the rooftop, because we're going to talk about it again. And now we're back, as if none of that ever happened, because it was all in Kyon's mind. The first thing Kyon sees is a light, which I see as a representation of his relationship with Haruhi. And then he takes a deep breath. And that's a movie technique that you so very rarely see nowadays. Just having the characters stop and take a breath. And that breath lends a little finality to his statement that he chose the other world in the dichotomy that Yuki set up. And going back to what we said about this not being the final solution to the ultimate problem of the film, I really do think that if Kyon or some other main character was placed in this situation and had the awareness to say, in more eloquent language, I value you as a person, and we can have a relationship in the old world that would be the same. And I gave all this attention and love to Haruhi, and I completely ignored you, and I'm so sorry. I think if Kyon says that here, instead of I like things better the way they were, I think he solves the riddle without getting stabbed. Unfortunately for him, but fortunately for the themes of the film, that's not the case. And that's exactly what's happening after Asahina's line of she's a normal girl. Kyon is imagining her, imagining the future they could have, appreciating everything about her, and who she could be, and who the girl he could get to know would be. And he just doesn't have the strength of character to get there. So the movie comes and kills him for it. I love everything about this bit. I love the fact of how well it coheres the movie together with the themes. I love the pacing and the directing, the pull-up on Asakura's face. How big of an oh shit moment this is, with being completely unpredictable. I love how it's foreshadowed with everything, including Kyon's reaction first time he sees Asakura in the post-disappearance world. I love how it has symbolism with her red coat. I love how unsettling her line in the elevator about I'll make you pay if you break Yuki's heart was at the time, but you've mostly forgotten about it. You feel good in Kyon's decision to go back to the woman that he loves. I love the psycho music that goes on. I especially love the sound effect that she tears the knife out of Kyon. I love the animation on the ligaments in Kyon's hand as he grasps his wound. And I love how clearly it is not what Yuki intended when she created this choice. And how her inability to express her desires to be valued and wanted and respected for everything that she is resulted in this miscommunication and pain being inflicted on anyone. And I love Asakura as a mirror for Haruhi and a foil for Yuki. if Yuki is already the foil for Haruhi in the fact that she is passive when Haruhi's eternally active, then Asahina filling that role of active side of Yuki is absolutely perfect, especially having her personified in this entirely separate character with all of this backstory that's already been established.
This is exactly what you wished for, isn't it?
And I especially love them actually bringing up the idea of what Yuki would wish for. She clearly doesn't wish to be in competition with Haruhi. She just saw that as the way to get what she wanted from Kyon without being able to express those feelings in words. And seeing how horribly it backfires on her is very tough. I especially love Asakura's voice actress and the way she conveys this sadism in her voice while still remaining ultimately cheerful. And I especially love Yuki grabbing the blade of the knife with her hand in a callback to what happened in The Melancholy. From here on out, the movie punts. It basically says the themes have been filled out and the characters have made their decision. We'll deal with the rest of the plot intricacies at a later time. And I suppose that's the advantage of time travel. However, it does kind of feel a little bit awkward. I myself haven't read the novels that follow the disappearance, only the ones previous to this. So I don't quite know if it's ever addressed how they come back in time and how everything goes down with what Kyon sees. But I always like to imagine that the Nagato that stops Asakura is that Nagato right there. That she whips off her glasses and grabs that knife immediately. Because that would somehow be her realizing that the setup she created was at fault, or at least partially at fault for the events that happened. That the choice between her and Haruhi was a false one and she would regret it. So that's the climax of the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, including, I think, one of my favorite scenes in all of animation. However, we still have a bit that Kyon has left unresolved, and that's not even counting the stuff that the movie will ultimately fail to provide us with any type of finality or closure on. However, with the scope of the film so far being about why Kyon does not love Yuki in the same way that he loves Haruhi, we'll finally get some closure on that in the next episode, so stay tuned.